What happens to a person's spirit when the world insists they are nothing and the divine seems to have abandoned them? For 14-year-old Celie, this is the reality of her childhood. She endures systemic abuse from the man she calls Pa, is traded like property to her husband, Mr. Blank, and is eventually stripped of her sister, Nettie, the only person who has ever shown her kindness. Celie survives by retreating into a state of numbness. She directs her letters to a dear God she has been taught to fear, a distant, white, patriarchal figure who mirrors the very men who oppress her. Alice Walker explicitly intended The Color Purple to be a theological work. For her, the story isn't just about physical survival. It's about the journey from religious captivity to spiritual freedom. Walker's commitment to this theme grew from her work in the civil rights movement. Participating in voter registration drives and marches across the segregated South gave her a first-hand look at how systemic systems work to erase a person's sense of self. Her time as an editor for Miss Magazine and her work in feminist spaces further informed the novel's critique. She saw how the intersection of racism and sexism created a specific kind of internal prison for women like Celie. Walker's narrative suggests that escaping physical abuse first requires breaking free from the internal, spiritual captivity of a punishing, distant God. That transformation begins with the arrival of Shug Avery. Known as the Queen Honeybee, her vibrant, unapologetic presence disrupts the monochrome isolation of Celie's daily life. Shug teaches Celie a radical new way to see the Creator. She rejects the idea of an old man in the sky, instead describing God as an it, or a great mystery, that cannot be held in a single human image. This diagram illustrates the shift in worldview Shug proposes. She replaces a rigid, top-down hierarchy of power with an interconnected web, where the divine exists equally in all living things. This is where the novel's title finds its meaning. Shug believes that God puts beauty in the world simply to be noticed, and that it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field and don't pay it any mind. This realization changes how Celie perceives her place in the world. If God exists in trees, in singing birds, and the color purple, then God is also present within Celie herself. Redefining God as a loving presence in nature allows those marginalized by society to recognize their own inherent divinity. While Celie is changing in Georgia, the story shifts to Africa. Through letters, we follow Nettie's journey as a missionary, where she begins to discover the complexity of her own roots. Upon reaching the coast, Nettie observes the vast colonial trade systems already in place. She sees a continent already being reshaped by European interests and infrastructure. Nettie witnesses the destruction of Olinka land and culture. Sacred sites are plowed under for foreign rubber plantations, forcing people to serve the interests displacing them. These colonial forces operate on the exact same logic of extraction as the men abusing Celie. The sisters' parallel lives suggest that the logic of erasure, whether in a Georgia farmhouse or an African village, stumbles when people maintain their spiritual identity and their connection to one another. Despite their losses, Celie and Nettie use their letters and their shared spirit to keep their humanity intact. Empowered by her new spiritual understanding, Celie finally reaches a breaking point. She stands at a dinner table and directly confronts her abuser, Mr. She delivers a fierce curse, claiming her right to exist in the universe. She tells him directly, "I'm poor, I'm black, I may be ugly and can't cook, but I'm here." This spiritual liberation leads to tangible independence. Celie moves to Memphis, starts her own tailoring business, and finally begins living for herself. The story reaches its emotional peak years later. Nettie returns from Africa, and the two sisters finally reunite on a porch, surrounded by their families and the natural world they have learned to love. Walker's story suggests that true liberation requires casting off systems of control and recognizing oneself as a radiant expression of the divine. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Alice Walker's classic, please like and leave a comment, and subscribe to World Classics English for more explorations of the literature that changed the world.